I'll just do my own introduction. My name is Nia Hughes. I'm the organising official for the post-production and facilities branch of BECTU. So I have the joy of working with these wonderful panelists and other both committee members, but also members on a daily occurrence, and have been working together for about 3 years now. Emma McCleave, who is wonderful, is actually going to host the whole webinar, but I'm just going to put down some rules, if that's okay. So you will see at the bottom that there is a chat function and also a Q&A function. So chat function is for chats. If you want to say hi to people that you know, or you want to discuss something amongst yourselves, that's absolutely fine, but there won't be questions taken from the chat function. You'll see a Q&A function, and we see a couple of questions in there already. That is the only place after the initial panel that we will be taking questions from. So Nigel Honey, yeah, that's right. Yeah, the initial discussion is going to be about an hour and a quarter, and then there'll be time for a Q&A after. That's it. This is a part of the BECTU Wednesday workshops. So if you're tweeting about us or Instagramming about us, please tag both BECTU, hashtag Wednesday workshops, and also the wonderful Rough Assembly. Emma's going to kick in about, if you want to join BECTU, that you can do so at a special offer this evening. And yeah, we can discuss next week's webinar at the end. Okay, over to you, Emma McCleave.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nia. So thank you everyone for logging in to join us tonight. As Nia said, my name is Emma. I was an assistant editor for many, many years, and now I am editing the last few years. We have a great session planned for you this evening with these editors. BECTU is the Union for the Creative and Broadcasting Industry, and the Rough Assembly is the post-production and facilities branch of that union. So tonight, BECTU and the Rough Assembly presents TV drama editing, a Q&A. So as you may have heard, we've had a whole bunch of questions come in. So I'm going to go through those tonight in a sort of set format and ask those to the editors, so we have a little bit of structure to how we start. And that'll go for about an hour, and then we'll do a live Q&A at the end. And as Nia said, you've got a little Q&A button down there where you can type stuff in, and we'll find it and we'll ask it. Hopefully, there might be thousands of questions. What will we do? Now, let me go from introductions, obviously, the place to start. Just in case you don't know who you are looking at tonight, let me start with Dan Roberts. Dan, do you want to give a little wave? Dan has spent time cutting Thomas Shelby and the Peaky Blinders. He has cut the Amazon hit series Hanna, and he recently was working on the adaptation of Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials. Very exciting first series. Meredith Leece. Hello, Meredith. Perfect. She cut her teeth as both an assistant and assembly editor on Game of Thrones. She has since moved to editing and has cut on Silent Witness and McDonald and Dodds, and she is currently working on an adaptation of Terry Pratchett's The Watch. And finally, we come to Simon Smith. Simon, the last one.
Hi everyone, hello.
Simon has cut on the gorgeous historical drama Victoria, on the hit TV cop show Endeavour, and recently he worked on Chernobyl, which scooped a bunch of awards last year, and I think made for both compelling, riveting, interesting, and also kind of horrendous viewing. Like, it was just so very impactful. So we're incredibly lucky to have all these guys here with us tonight. And it's kind of exciting for us, I think, to all be together at the moment, because whatever you're doing with your days, it's super nice to come together tonight and sort of focus on ourselves and creativity and the industry and feel like we're a bigger part of something when we're so isolated at the moment. So thank you for coming and welcome. So to start, we're going to look at prior to getting jobs. Now, if you're not already an editor, or if you don't have an agent, something happens when, when you get jobs, it's you will have to meet with the director, and very often you get sent the script beforehand. Exactly, Nigel. What is an agent? Yeah. So they'll help you get jobs perhaps, and you'll get your script and you'll have to meet your director, and this is prior to getting a job. So when you're looking for your next job, let's start with you, Dan. What do you look for in a script?
Well, the first consideration is how hungry are your children? Basically, I mean, I've been editing now for sort of 15 years, and a while ago there wasn't as much work around as there has been recently, and that was a real consideration: is, are they paying money? Okay, I'll do it. It's sort of I haven't really been in a situation where I had the choice of lots of prime projects. So, I mean, since about 2016, I had an uptick in my fortunes, and now I've got a great agent. I share an agent with Simon. I do get sent stuff on quite a regular basis, which is very fortunate. I feel very lucky. But basically, I mean, I once saw Bob Hoskins, the actor Bob Hoskins, talking about how he chooses his projects, and I employ the same criteria. Basically, he used to go down in his dressing gown first thing in the morning, and if the post had arrived on the doormat and there was a script there, he picks it up and he'd take it to the toilet to do his morning ablutions. I don't do this. I don't do this part of it. But if he started reading the script on the toilet and he was still there on the toilet when he finished the script, he would ring his agent and say, "This script is a bum freezer and I want to do it." So it's basically, does the script speak to you? And it's sort of, if you like it, if you think it's worthwhile doing, it's like if you've ever read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, the idea, in order to feel like you're doing something which is worthwhile, in order to sort of feel engaged with something, you've got to believe in it. You've got to actually think it's worthwhile in some way. And there are other considerations which usually come up when you talk to your agent, which is all about, oh, this director's going somewhere, or that production company is great to get in with, and the cast's amazing and it'll be really good for you. But actually, all of those things are kind of secondary to how good you think the script is. I mean, after doing His Dark Materials, I went straight on to a really lo-fi show called Trigonometry, which was on quite recently, and there was no kudos or prestige attached to that, but I thought it would be quite a lovely thing. I really loved the scripts, and I thought it would be a lovely thing to do as a sort of a palate cleanser after His Dark Materials. Not that was an unpleasant experience, but something which was just completely different. It's lovely to do a variety of things.
Thank you. What about you, Simon?
I mean, I definitely concur with Dan. Like, you get scripts in, and sometimes you're not able to, pick and choose. For a long time, you're not able to pick and choose. If we could have our choice and our preference all the time, the thing that I look for in a script is if it's something that I'd like to watch. And that's, for me, that's the kinds of projects that I most want to work on, is things that I would like to watch, right? I remember when I heard about Chernobyl, I was excited even before I read the script. I knew who the script writer was. I was like, oh, this is great, he's doing this project. And then when I read those scripts, I'm like, this is brilliant. I can, you can imagine it coming off the page, and imagine seeing it and being a viewer of it. And I was like, oh, I have to do everything I can to try and be involved in this. I think this is one of the best things I've read. Going back to when I was an assistant, the same then. I'd want to be involved in projects, of shows that I was like, oh, I'd love to watch this. And I was quite lucky that as an assistant, some of the editors that I'd worked for would share with me the scripts that they were getting through, so and I'd read through them. If there was one that came along, I'm like, oh, I'd love to do that. I'd chase after that job.
May I ask, when you say, you read Chernobyl and it was reading off the page like, this is amazing, this is going to be, I mean, like, I imagine that it read amazing, but did you have any idea that it would just, I mean, it blew up everywhere?
So I knew it was amazing, and it was incredible, but that doesn't always translate to success in popularity, popular success, right? Years and years ago, I was an assistant on a show called Utopia, which I loved those scripts, and I loved that show.
I love
one
that
of the best jobs. Oh, it's superb.
I'm watching it right now, Simon.
Oh, are you?
Right
great.
now.
Oh, great. Well, it's kind of
It's a lot now, I'd say, than it is when it before.
There are a lot of
it's kind of like scary relevant as well, like the idea of the vaccine and stuff like that. But I remember loving that script. Now that show, at the time, didn't gain traction. With Chernobyl, we caught a wave and maybe we filled a hole. Maybe there was, a appetite for it. Utopia, there wasn't, and after 2 series, they decided that was it, and it kind of disappeared off. And people that have seen it and liked it, I think I connect to straight away. I'm like, oh yeah, I love that show. But lots of people haven't seen it, So I guess that's a case. Both Chernobyl and Utopia were a case of personal taste in that material. And if you get a job on something that you love the material, it doesn't really matter if it's successful or not. You enjoy going to work every day because of what you're working on. And it's not always like that. You can't always get those jobs, and you have to hope for those jobs to come along. But when they do come, they're the best ones.
Simon wangled me a job working with Mark Munden on a recent project because he knew I was such an enormous fan of Utopia.
Really? That's great.
Yeah. So the writer of Utopia and the director of Utopia just worked together again. And when they came to need another editor, I knew that Dan got it. I knew that Dan would get it, because Dan was always a big fan of Utopia, and I was like, oh well, you could see if Dan's available. He likes this stuff, and I think when you work on something with people and you all like the material, you get better things out of it.
Yeah.
Meredith, when you read a script for the first time, whether it's with, waiting for the job or getting the job, or do you take notes as you go, or
No.
what do you do?
The first time I read it, I just read it. Sometimes, as these guys were saying, with some scripts really jump off the page and I can imagine them straight away. Some I have to read a couple of times before I even know really what's going on. It depends on, which says more about me than the writing, to be fair. But then what I will do is then I will go back through and read it. I'll show you this script that happens to be next to me. This is not. And I put all these markers in about like where there's flashbacks and where there's music and where there's other things I wanted to remember, because I'm not very good at keeping loads and loads of stuff in my head. I have to write things down and I have to keep markers on things like that. Otherwise it comes out on television and I'm like, oh yeah, I wanted to change that. Like, and I can't remember properly. So also to be honest, and it depends on the job, because some stuff that I've worked on, it happens so quickly that you just don't have time. Mm-hmm. And you never get back. You're like, oh, I was going to read that script again, but now the edit is finished. Like it's like they happen just so fast. And you have, so it's nice to have the time to be able to do that. I've gone to interviews where the scripts haven't been ready, and I've gone to interviews where I've read the scripts in advance.
Mm-hmm.
It depends.
When you work on something like The Watch, which has source material, or something like His Dark Materials, Dan, which has source material, does that read into your reading of the script at all? Does that?
I had no relationship with any of Terry Pratchett's stuff, other than Good Omens, which is a lot different because it's not just his. So when I read the script and went for the interview and started the job, I hadn't read anything. But then before I started the job, I did get a couple of audiobooks just to sort of set the stage for, because The Watch is an adaptation. It's a inspired by, I guess, it's not a straight adaptation, but you still want to get the sort of
The feeling.
Yeah, because I feel like it's important to bring, like, Terry Pratchett's a very well loved author, and I want to bring the same tone that he has to the screen, because that's what fans are going to be looking for, and why people love him as well. So I did back and do, when I was working on Thrones, I never read any of the Game of Thrones books, but it was already, to be fair, it was already season 6 when I started. It wasn't, I hadn't, so I'd seen seasons 1 through 5, but I'd never read any of them.
Thank you. Dan, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I did. I'd already read those books, but when I've worked on other projects that have been based on books, I always read the books as well. I mean, if I really want the job, because it gives you something else to talk about in the interview as well. You can talk about the differences. You can talk about sort of talk about the book, and yeah, I mean, I've got a process that I go through before an interview if I really want it, which is like pretty exhaustive, and the amount of prep you do before you go there massively increases the sort of chances of you getting the job. I don't read the script the first time. I don't make any notes the first time I read it. I just read it, and then if it's awful, then I'll just ditch it. But if it's something I want to go for, then I'll do a huge amount of prep. Yeah, I basically do a script breakdown. I sort of analyze every scene. I draw up a list of positives and negatives, which I sort of memorize before going into the. I worked for an editor called Michael Parker, and he told me his process that he went through for preparing for interviews, and it's probably a good 3 days' work to get ready for an interview. But if you want it really badly, you just have to do it.
Simon nodding away.
Yeah, and if you want it badly and you get the job, then that 3 days' work is worth it, isn't it?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, after, I'll read, if I get the job, I'll read all the other episodes of the series and maybe do the same sort of depth of analysis before I start, but then I won't look at. So you sort of absorb it before you start the job, but then I hardly look at the scripts again from when you start getting material.
And so we get a lot of procedural questions, like how you go through process. So I'm going to concentrate a little bit on that. So when you get dailies in, how do you watch dailies? Are you marking them? Are you watching them? Are you making notes? How do you watch dailies? Simon, do you want to start?
Yeah. So in an ideal world where the rushes have come in, the night before, the assistants have been able to get in early and get them ready. I love it if I can start my day with the dailies, right? So I like to have my breakfast and my coffee and my notes, and that's how I, kind of wake up and get into my day. And I'll usually sit at like a viewing monitor, like a client monitor, or I'm very lucky in the edit suite I have at the end of the garden. I've got a projector. So on the last job, I projected everything and watch my rushes that way. I try and leave the Avid, out of the way.
I love that. In my Avid suite in the end of the garden, I have a projector. Yeah. I don't know if
definitely
a usual phrase, but it's great.
Yeah,
it's
great.
I'm
very lucky, very happy, very accommodating family who have let me do that. So I'll sit there with my coffee and watch it through. I've got a few macros set up for dropping markers on my dailies rushes. I make handwritten notes in a book that I keep through all of the shoot, and there'll be notes of things that jump out to me, but also things I'll make a list of things that I want to talk to the director about. And I'll try and do it. Mark Munden, who Dan mentioned earlier, he's got the best rushes process that I've had with the director, in that he watches his dailies every day and makes handwritten notes every take and every slate. At every take, he'll have a handwritten note, like as a list. So with him, I try and emulate that. So if there's daily notes, I'll just make them per slate, per take, as you watch it down as they filmed it. and then we'll go over the conversation. Usually Mark and I will talk in the day about the dailies that I watched, the day before. So
Meredith?
I tend to watch the master take of everything, of every setup. Have a quick scan to make sure that it is the same setup every take one is like something massively different. Then I assemble from that, and then I go back and check the rest, which is not maybe the best practice, but and I also tend to check the first take and the last take of everything, because sometimes where the actors' instincts were at the beginning are a lot different than after they've been directed a lot, and depending on what's happening, sometimes it's better at the beginning and sometimes it's better at the end, depending on what's happening on set and just depending on loads of things. Like, it's not it's just an observation. Yeah, and so eventually I will watch all the rushes, but especially I've been on a lot of shows recently, I don't know if you guys have as well, where I'm expected to have assemblies sort of cranking out. So like I am not a fast enough editor that I don't have time to watch everything before I have to get an assembly out. So that tends to be why I'm
quite unique, I think, to the UK. From just to explain that, actually, because I don't know that happens in Australia. It didn't when I was working there. Mind you, that's many years ago. I don't believe it happens so much on American drama, but it's the requirement to take the dailies that you've had over the course of a day and basically cut it that day and send full assemblies at the end of the week. It's quite a common thing in Britain, and it's definitely, is that the kind of thing that you're talking about, where you basically
because what I would really like to do is just assemble as the days go by and then take Friday and maybe even Saturday, because I'm a bit new and I'm quite slow, to sort of go back and fix things, but I can't do that at this point because everyone's like, we need them at Friday at 5 o'clock, and I'm like, all right, fine. So it just tends to be not the greatest assembly necessarily that goes out. But they're not really tends to go out to people who aren't really watching it for editing. They're watching it to make sure there's a scene there and to make sure they don't have to pick anything. They're not watching it for editing.
Mm-hmm. What about yourself, Dan?
I like to edit in the morning because I'm fresher, and I find that I do better work when I'm sharp in the morning. So I do it the other way around to Simon. I would do all of my prep in the afternoons, and then absorb, that will percolate overnight, and then I'll cut it first thing in the morning. And I don't like Meredith. I don't feel like I have time in the day to watch everything real time. I have a process that I go through. I picked this up from I worked with John Amos on Cuban Fury. I was brought onto Cuban Fury to cut all the dance sequences, which was brilliant. But I mean, there was such an enormous amount of material on that. They were shooting 4 cameras on all the dance sequences, and there was just mountains of it. And in order to sort of, he taught me through his methodology in order for me to be able to just find my way around this stuff. And that was basically, well, for a dance sequence or a fight sequence, I break stuff down into really small chunks. And so you start at the beginning of you look at your first shot in the scene bin, and you would, a particular dance move or whatever, you would put the section of the first shot which covers that part of the scene, put that down into a timeline, and then break the dance up or the fight up into chunks. And the next take, you sort of put that in, you put a marker at the start of each of those different chunks. And then the next slate, you sort of build it. You build all, so you end up with a timeline which has got every shot that covers that first chunk of the dance lined up. Mm-hmm. And so I would probably then never go back to the sort of the tiles that are in the bin. I always use that, what's called a compilation roll, to edit from. And you can very quickly go through and find precisely what you need. And when you've got 40 different angles for the same moment, that's invaluable, because you look at this, you look at sort of, you might have so much material that it's all split into about 5 different bins, and you're poking around trying to find which shot it was you remembered doing a particular thing. So yeah, but actually I've sort of carried that through, not just for sort of fights and dance sequences, but I do it on drama as well. So I break it down. I was working with an editor called Sasha Schwark before Christmas, and he does exactly the same thing. There'll be turning points in the scene. You know, you can break down a sort of 3-minute scene into 5 or 6 chunks. It's weird how often it ends up being about a 40-second chunk before the next sort of turning point in the scene. And compile all of the different slates or different takes and slates that cover a particular section together. So, and it's brilliant when you're in the fine cut, because you can be working. You can have your cut on the record side and have your comp roll on the source side. You can do reverse match frame. It takes you to that portion of the material, and you can just quickly, with the director, skim through and say this, very quickly see precisely what's available to you.
So that touches on your cutting technique as well. Then, if that's what you prepare and cut from, that's.
Yeah, I mean, you have to go through the material. I don't necessarily go through it in real time, but I go through it all. Yeah. I usually watch the last couple of takes of every setup. But by the time you've gone through that process, you know precisely what the coverage is. You know it very well. So. And
so how do you apply that when you're approaching a scene, first cut, you've got a blank timeline, you're going to go, you just start from the start? No, not always. I mean, you might have to sort of start in the middle and build out, you know, because there'll be a particular moment which is only covered on one shot, or you know you've got to get to a particular point, use a particular shot at a certain point, and so you might build that section first and then sort of think about, by the time I've done that comp roll, I kind of have an idea in my head what the structure of the scene's going to be, and so I know, you know, usually do just start at the beginning. But you know, it's like anything, if you dive in before you've done that prep, you'll sink. And what about you, Simon? How do you approach a blank timeline? How do you start a scene?
I've just noticed on the chat someone's asked what dailies are. Shall I just answer that quickly so that just to answer what that point is? So the dailies are today's rushes, the rushes that came in from the shoot that happened yesterday. You get those every day. Meredith earlier was talking about, you know, trying to assemble everything from that day's rushes. I very much keep to that I have to assemble today everything that they shot the previous day. Keep up to camera is what I refer to it as, keeping up to camera. If you don't keep up to camera, it will overtake you, and you know it's so hard to catch back up, to get out of that rut, and you'll have directors asking you questions for what they shot that day, so or you know the previous day. So I have a discipline of, you know, I watch my dailies in the morning. I think, you know, on old features many years ago, that they would have all done that. They would have, you know, shown the dailies in a theatre space for everyone to kind of watch.
In the olden days, they used when they were shooting on film, you used to get 40 minutes, and I'm old enough to remember, you used to get 40 minutes of material a day. You know, now we get 3 hours.
Exactly, yeah. 3 hours.
Sure. I mean, I will, to make it a bit easier, I'll watch mine in a split, so I can see all the cameras at once. So I'll watch 2 cameras at once, or 3 cameras at once, 4 cameras at once. I will speed through stuff, like scrub through stuff quickly with JKL black buttons. The best, when I was an assistant, one of the editors that I worked for a lot, he would have me in to watch dailies with him, you know, and we'd do it as a communal thing. Like after I'd sunk it all up, he'd get into work, we'd sit down together, we'd have a coffee together, we'd watch the dailies together, and then at the end of that, we'd talk through what we needed to do. And if I'm in a position where I can do that, I feel that that's, for me, the way that I enjoy working the most, you know. On the last job that I did, we couldn't do it all the time, but whenever we could, I'd sit with the assistants. I think it's also a great way. I learned so much doing that. So it's a great way for the assistants to learn, and it's a great way to just cut a lot of conversations out that you would end up having later, because you kind of get all the information you need of what you're going to do as a team for the rest of the day in that morning briefing, basically, where you all watch the rushes. So sorry, that's dailies. Going on to what you said about how do I approach timeline. So for me, having taken my notes from the dailies that I've watched, I'll usually block out a scene as per the script. So I'll start with the master shot, if there is a master shot. If there's a wide shot, just drop that down. Often that won't be for the whole duration of the scene, so you might have to piece together the different bits that covered the scene, and I'll try and make a timeline that is every line in the scene, even if it's not from the angle that I'm going to use, just so then I can watch the scene down in one go, because as the rushes don't always cover all the scene. I'll drop in on that timeline any of the shots that I feel are specifically meant for a certain moment. So inserts of, looking at a point of view of looking at something, pressing keys on a keyboard where they're entering in a password, I don't know, whatever they're doing. So I'll drop in the inserts. I'll use my notes. On my notes, I would have put, this is a great moment that I want to use, or this is a great shot that I want to use for this moment. So I'll start dropping those in and really just building from memory what are the bits that that I wanted to include on the scene. That would be my first assembly, really, first pass.
What happens when you get stuck?
So I guess on an assembly, I don't really get stuck. You can get yourself into a corner where the angles don't really work because you've gone down a route and you're like, oh shit, now I need to get over there for this bit to that person who I haven't seen, for the rest of the conversation. So we don't know that they've sat down. That's another thing that in, say something like Chernobyl, they were all moving around and someone would go and sit down, and you can't really cut to someone sitting down if you haven't seen that they've gone and sat down, so you have to kind of make sure that you've covered all of the blocking that they've done. But I don't really get too stuck with assemblies. The bit where I get stuck is later when you're trying to hone it and make it and not fine cut it with the director, but even fine cutting it yourself. The assembly bit's quite, there's that bit, okay, I like that bit, I might drop a couple of alternates on the same timeline and maybe mute in the scene. If you imagine how the scene goes on the page, so if there's other bits that I want for a particular moment, I'll put those on as alternates on the scene as well.
Thank you. Meredith, what do you do when you get caught in a scene and you're in the middle of it and you feel a block?
And this is assuming I don't like that someone hasn't rang and said I need that in 20 minutes. Because if they have, you just finished it. I will often just start with the master, like Simon had said, and sort of just so that that the structure of the scene is this, and then cut bits out and put things in. If I'm really stuck and I'm having a hard time, I just stop and do something else. Do another scene, have lunch, bother the assistants, whatever. Just do something else, because if you're going around in all these circles, and it's the same for any kind of creative work, if you're going around in all these circles, you are not gonna. I find that I can't work myself out of them. I have to stop and do something else, and then you come back and you're like, oh right, yeah, obviously it's just it's fine.
You'll wonder why you made it such a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
Do you find that, Dan? So do you break as well when you get blocked in a scene and go back, and then is it just clear, or you've thought of something else, or? Yeah,
I mean, I do that quite a lot anyway. I find that I don't like to finish things, because I don't finish things and then go for a break, for example, because when you come back, you have to start all over again. I always like to leave things sort of half done, so that when you go away from it and you come back, you're suddenly thrown back into it. You think, oh, that's where I was, and you sort of get back up to operating temperature really quickly. But yeah, if you're, I mean, I do like to take sort of regular breaks and get away from it and just let it sort of go around in your mind, you know, subconsciously even.
And when you approach a scene, any scene, how do you choose your point of view in a scene? How do you decide on point of view? Yeah.
Well, I don't know. It's sort of it's a tricky question. It sort of should be clear from the way that it's being played and the way it's written, and I just follow whoever I'm empathizing with, or who I feel is who feels most important at that moment. It's sort of you need to sort of have empathy to be able to edit. You know, you need to sort of feel the emotions that the characters are feeling. You know, I sometimes, I'm not ashamed to say that I can cry at rushes and stuff, you know, because it's sort of so you basically just follow your notes and you sort of go with whoever you think is the most important.
When I was training with Elliot Graham, and one of the things he taught me or suggested that I do if I got stuck or if I was lost in a scene was, where were the characters beforehand? Like, where were they, like, as opposed to starting a scene, where were the characters beforehand? What scenes lead into this scene? Some of those types of things, because that's something I learned can definitely inform point of view. That's what I found. What do you think, Simon?
So I actually use point of view to explore the rushes more. So once I've cut a scene one way and assembled the scene, you know, and basically got it down, then I might try and skew the scene for one person's point of view, and then later on do it for someone else's point of view, just to explore all of the things that actor did throughout the scene, you know. And sometimes I love seeing a scene that feels very much from one person's point of view, and sometimes you see stuff on that repeat viewing or on that pass that you wouldn't have noticed before, that you didn't see before. I have had assistants do that as well. I'd say, and when I was an assistant, an editor that I worked for would say, go and do this, but spin it round to someone else's point of view. You know, not necessarily the person you're gonna use. Sometimes, you know, just someone arbitrary or someone who you're definitely not going to use, but just so that you can have another way of looking at the material. But yeah, no, and sometimes, you know, I've had an assistant show me a scene from someone's point of view that I wanted to look at, and I've been blown away. I'd be like, wow, like I didn't even know that was in there as an option. And then it's about, what can you take from that into, you know, your main cut, your fine cut, whatever you want to call it, to really get the best out of it. I like to use point of view as so some people talk about, you know, starting a scene from the end, starting a scene from the middle. What you just said there, that's great advice. You know, start from where the previous scene left off. I like to change up the point of view to help explore the potential in the scene.
Thank you. And scene cards. Do you guys use scene cards when you're cutting? They are the bane of assistants' existences sometimes, putting all the scene cards together. Do you guys use them when you cut? Do you need them?
I use them. I use them to know, especially when I'm assembling, where I'm at with everything, because I find the script sometimes is just like, I like to have it on the wall and be like, right, those are scenes that haven't been done, and that's the scene before this scene, and now I know where they're coming from and all this kind of stuff. I don't use them as much afterwards, actually. So like, I don't actually need them with the pictures and stuff on them as much as I do with just like a one line from, like, this is what this script is, like, this is a location and this is the headline of what's happening. Mm-hmm. When I use them afterwards, like right now we're doing we're sort of looking at structure of an episode, and so then you're kind of like, well, if we put that back there, then that guy hasn't said that thing, and we can't have them be ahead of them, and there's all that kind of stuff. I find it useful for that when you have complex story threads running in, you know, this way that you need to make sure that everything's happening. And even then, sometimes you don't know till you watch it and you're like, oh yeah, you can't say that.
Yeah. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, same. I don't tend to look at those things when I'm assembling. But yeah, during the fine cut, when you're dealing with structure, that's when they really come into their own. There was an episode of Trigonometry which was just couldn't crack the structure. It sort of made logical sense if you had it one way, but it wasn't emotionally involving. And if you had this sort of ideal structure for the emotion, then it didn't make any logical sense. You know, it was like, and if you moved that sort of made no sense. It was complicated. So we tried it every which way, and the cards were invaluable in doing that. Yeah.
Thank you. We've had several questions which are kind of about roles in the cutting room. And so I thought I would move on. Now, this next question can be a massive question. So as succinctly as possible, please. Let's start with you, Simon, and your pathway to becoming an editor.
Okay, so I guess I was an assistant, or I was an assistant in drama, and then I found myself working for one particular editor quite a lot. We really got on really well and managed to stay together for quite a few jobs. And he's the editor that, you know, I feel I learnt most from and taught me most of how I do things, and I kind of follow a lot of the ways of working that he did. But I was always keen to be advancing, right, in what I was doing. So I didn't like doing the same job too often. So with him, I asked him, when he asked me to come back for another series of something that we worked on together, I was like, I really want to come back. I really love working with you, but can I move up, you know? So he then gave me that first job as an assembly editor on one of his shows. A couple of years later, he was doing another show, and he said, do you want to come and work on it? And I was like, oh, I'd love to work with you, but I can't, you know, keep doing this. I've got to, you know, start editing. You know, that you're doing a whole series with all these episodes. Is there any chance I could, you know, have a go at editing one of the episodes? And again, he was like, yeah, let's do that. And he gave me one of the episodes, and that was how I got my first, you know, proper editor credit on a TV drama. Now that, you know, took a long time, a good relationship with a particular editor. Also, those breaks were with the same director as well, so the director was happy to give me those breaks. The break where I went from assembly up to editor, the editor had agreed it and the director had agreed it, and I don't know that they'd ever told anyone else. So as far as everyone else was concerned, the editor was still cutting all of them. And it wasn't until, and I think they kind of did that in case, you know, they would just, you know, in case there was a problem or whatever, he could carry on and do it. If I wanted to put in the extra hours and you know, edit an episode, then great. He was happy with that. And it wasn't until the execs were coming in for viewings, because I was assisting or assembling on the other episodes. So I think they still thought that I was just the assembly editor. They didn't know that I'd done the work to edit a whole episode myself. Did
you just walk in and yell "ta-da" at them?
No, I think I just don't think they cared. You know, they saw me pressing the play button and just assumed that someone had edited it. So they were like, yeah, the edit looks good. That's fine. You know, I owe that editor a lot. He gave me a lot of breaks, but I was always hungry for it. I was always, you know, telling him that I wanted more, and I think if, you know, you can get that relationship with someone and they can see that you do want it, and they can see that you're doing the work, and, you know, they can see that you're ready for it, then that's a lucky position to be in, really.
Thank you. What about yourself, Dan?
Yeah, same for me. I mean, I spent a while as an assistant, and I worked with some lovely editors who were very generous with their knowledge, and I there's an editor called Mick Audsley who cut 12 Monkeys and Harry Potter 4, which I assisted him on, and we worked together for a long time. And he gave me a break to assemble John Madden film. So after Harry Potter 4, he was so exhausted, he wanted to take some time off, and so he did. He let me assemble the next one. And then Fran Parker, I mentioned Michael Parker earlier, his wife Fran, who Meredith knows from Game of Thrones. She was doing a BBC series, 5-parter. The post schedule was a bit nuts, and they wanted to get somebody slightly junior in to come and sort of fill the gaps. And she got me, and I'd worked with her cutting a sort of the DVD of the FIFA World Cup 2006 or whatever it was, and she, she thought she was impressed with what I'd done on that, so she took me onto this sort of Emmy-winning drama called Cranford, like a period drama. Yeah. And she had a plan from day one. She was like, you're here supposed to sort of mop up anything I can't do, but why don't you just do anything to do with episodes 2 and 4 from the start, and we'll see if we get away with it. And everybody liked my assemblies, and so I was given those 2 episodes to cut in my own right.
Well, that's incredible. And Meredith, what about yourself? Yours is a more recent move. How did you?
This basically the same. The first editing credit I have is on Save Me Series 1, and what happened there is I'd worked with Orolotti loads of times before, and he needed an assembly editor, actually, and sort of an assistant, but the shoot was already finished, so it wasn't sort of full-time assisting, it was mainly an assembly role, and I came on and did that. But basically the director had come in immediately after the shoot, and Oral hadn't really looked at the last episode at all, and he was like, can you put the last episode together, because I haven't looked at any of the rushes. And I was like, yeah, okay, no problem. And because there was only one director for all 6, so because they were working on the 3, 4, and 5, 2 had already been done before I got on. He kind of just left me to do 6. I did a number of versions of it. I worked with the director and all this kind of stuff, and then he said, in the end, he was like, "Oh, I'm going to get you an editor credit on this because, you did." So we share a credit on that, actually. As far as Thrones went, as getting that assembly credit, it was a similar thing. I was working with Tim Porter for a couple of years as his assistant, and when the last season came up, before the last season came up, because I'd done this Save Me credit, which I used as, you can also use things as I said, I called him up and I was like, listen, I've done this job. And he was like, that's great. And I was like, this means I can't come back as your assistant. And he was like, yeah, I know that. He said, let me see what I can do. And once you move up, you do try to draw a line under, because I had this editor credit, but like an assembly credit on Thrones is a big credit. So I was like, yeah, I'll definitely come as an assembly editor onto that. And then, and the big assembly credits that I have, like Thrones and Poldark and things like this, did help me. Like, people bring them up in interviews now, even when I go in, because it means that how a big show works, how a visual effects heavy show works, that kind of thing. And then eventually I was able to sort of draw a line under assisting and only do assembly stuff. And then I decided to, and I was fortunate enough to be in a place where financially it worked out for me, because it didn't work for a little while. Not everybody can do that. I said, I'm not going to assist or assemble anymore. I'm only going to edit. And I got in touch with an agent and all this kind of stuff. And eventually that did pay off. But like, I didn't work for a little, like it was sort of at the point where I was like, I'm just going to have to take a job. But then something came through. So the reason I bring this up is because a lot of people sort of yo-yo back and forth for a bit, and that's totally normal, because like Dan was saying, like, how hungry are your children, that you have to keep working often. Yeah, that's how I made the move up. Cutting short films as well. So I had a few things go to festivals and win little awards, and all the cutting that you do helps.
It contributes. It's definitely, the theme seems to be, you need to ask for help when you need to express out loud, this is what I would like to be doing. Like, that's extremely, yeah.
And find the people, like, because you'll find in your career that you have like you know, I've worked for really, really lovely editors that I wouldn't necessarily work for again because they don't bring me in as part of the team. I don't want to be that kind of assistant. There are other assistants who do that, and it's great and it's fine and everything, but like, you'll find people that you naturally work with better, and those are the people who are going to want you on their team and help you out creatively and help you out with your career and things like that.
Yeah, if you can win the trust of your editor, they'll bring you into the creative process. You know, they'll sort of because, you know, they need feedback. I need feedback from my assistants. They sort of make you part of the conversation. They need you to do their sound work and that sort of maybe assemble stuff. So from that, they'll know how keen you are. You know, I've never explicitly said to either of those people who helped me out and get my first breaks, let me have an episode. It was like but they knew anyway, because I was always involved in those conversations and always just lapping that stuff up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so now that you're editing, now that you're editors, what do you look for when you hire your first assistant? Meredith, do you want to start?
Right now, before the pandemic, availability. there's no one.
Before the pandemic,
no, but in all honesty, it's a huge trust thing more than anything. It's just somebody that you can trust with the cutting room, who you know is going to be really diligent about doing a good job, be really honest when something's happened, and who sort of, I also look for people who are looking for that thing as well. I prefer my first assistant to want to be an editor. Mm-hmm. I find I work creatively better with them that way, because they want to do those things. Because not everybody wants to cut, and that's fine. But it sometimes means that, like, you know, if I've got previouslys and things like that I don't love cutting, an assistant who doesn't want to become an editor won't necessarily want to cut those either, because, you know. But yeah, so I look for somebody who's just keenness to learn and grow. And for the first, experience running a cutting room is key, because it doesn't matter how keen you are. If you get in over your head, like I have my own job, like it becomes very difficult to stay abreast of things if you've got absolutely no experience. But that being said, in a big cutting room, you should be able to get seconds in and get those people the experience they need to move up. And but yeah, it's mainly trust, and also, like, to be honest, somebody you can spend time with. It's a long old day.
Simon, what about you in your garden suite at the
I look for someone who can knows how to set things up to work remotely, someone who doesn't need me to be there every day. No, so I mean, like, actually, with this whole move to remote working and you know, even working in my garden, I do feel concerned about the relationship that assistants and editors are going to have, and if there's going to be the opportunities that assistants need for learning and working together. As I say, the editor I worked with and learned a lot from, you know, I'd get to go in and watch rushes with him. We talk every day. There'd be this instant communication, and I feel, you know, that there's a problem if I don't get that with my assistants when I'm working from home. So I do try and, you know, I know it sounds silly, but even before this Zoom stuff, like regular FaceTime chats every day, I want my assistants to watch all the rushes, you know. I feel that if they want to be editors, then the best way they can learn, and the best way they have to watch all the rushes. You know, it's not just about syncing it up, putting it on a timeline, exporting it, and sticking it up on Pix. I want them to have watched it. I want them to engage in it. I want them to be ideally interested in the show and the material, and have a connection to the show and the material. I did go onto a job once, and I went onto a late episode, and I asked the assistant, what's happened with these two characters before, you know, and they were like, oh, I don't know, I don't watch it. And I was like, oh God, like, you've been on all 10 episodes. I was hoping that you'd know this, you know. So I like ideally to find someone who is engaged with the show and not just engaged with the job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about yourself, Dan?
Yeah, completely agree with all of that. But also, I mean, to be an editor, you have to be sort of a diplomat, and you've got to be quite sort of politically astute. And I think that's important for really important for assistants as well. You've got to know, you've got to understand the lie of the land in the cutting rooms. You've got to understand the politics. You've got to be sensitive to that. You've got to have a sort of sense of decorum. You know, if you can't sort of, it's not a case of like being like a Victorian child. You can only speak when you're spoken to, but there's a protocol, you know, there's a sort of a, I mean, I'm tempted to tell a horror story about an assistant that I had once, but
there's only 4 of us in the room that you can
okay.
say.
I won't mention any names, obviously. I would like, I'm about to moan about an assistant. I would like to point out I've had some incredible assistants over the years, but this one was not. This one was quite unbelievable. There were 3 editors on this job, and he didn't do this to me, fortunately, because I would have exploded. But I'd asked this assistant to do several things for me, which were just not really getting done. He didn't really have an interest in being an assistant. He wanted to cut as soon as possible, even though it was his first drama job. I was wondering why all this stuff that I kept giving him to do, some of which was quite interesting, wasn't getting done. And I realised that actually there was one of the other editors had an episode which was structurally really tricky. They couldn't get the right structure for this episode. And this assistant was basically spending all of his time trying to crack this nut. He saw an opportunity here for him to shine and to win some sort of accolades, you know. And so he thought he cracked the structure of this episode, walked into this other editor's cutting room while the director was there, and proceeded to hold forth about how he'd restructured it and hadn't he done, and tell them basically what to do with the episode. And didn't go down very well. The other editor actually came in and moaned to me and was absolutely livid, really fuming, steam coming out of his ears.
That so much comes down to what Meredith was talking about to do with trust, wasn't it? Like you've got to be able to trust your assistant. You've got to be able to trust the person who you're working with. I think the point about diplomacy with assistants is a good point. Like definitely that's something that they need. They need to be able to read the politics, both with the director, editor, editors, if there are multiple editors, assistants, post supervisors. It's quite a thing. And sorry, Simon.
I was going to say, when you become an editor, you need all of that with producers and directors and execs and writers and so on. So it's a skill that we still all have to battle with and have and maintain. It's not just assistants know your place sort of thing. No, not at all. It's as editors we have to know how to be diplomatic.
Yeah, definitely. And if you could give a piece of advice to an edit trainee or a student who would like to cut drama, what type of advice would you give them, Meredith?
Cut as much as you can. So try to, even as the trainee or first, second assistant, try to see if an editor or a first will let you assemble, even if it's something that doesn't need to be assembled, it's already been assembled, and talk you through your scene, because assembling stuff is only half the, if nobody's sort of giving you any feedback on it, you're only learning half the things. And as you move up, controversial advice maybe, but especially when you're the first, if you've got support, try to do as much cutting as you can, and leave the other, and get your team to do the other tasks as much as you can. They're obviously still your responsibility. And short films and all kinds of that's what I would say is cut as much as you can. Watch stuff that you would like to cut for style and things like that. Pay attention to editing, but I don't know. Cut as much as you can is the only thing I could
Yeah, and all sorts of stuff, you know, pop videos, commercials, factual stuff. It all helps. It all sort of informs what you do, you know.
Yeah. What about you, Simon? Any extra advice?
So trainees, I would say people may disagree with this. Make the coffee, right? If if you make the coffee, make the tea, take it into the editor, you found an excuse to get into the room, right? You're more likely then to be invited to just sit there and watch or hang out or whatever. You can talk to them. I always found I quite liked making the coffee when I was, you know, a trainee and an assistant. Even now as an editor, I quite like making the coffee. But I see that as an opportunity for an interaction. Even when I was a runner on a production where I was on set, you know, I'd find excuses to go to the cutting rooms, you know, to deliver paperwork or something, just to have that interaction. At somewhere like Higher Works, where, you know, a lot of us have worked, where there's a communal kitchen, if you're in the kitchen making tea for everyone on the team, you're also interacting with all the other people that are in the kitchen and all the other editors that you're going to bump into and have conversations and interactions with. Definitely don't see that as dog's body work or as, you know, inferior work or work, you know, oh, I'm making tea. See that as an opportunity to interact with the people, because outside of making the tea and taking it into them, those opportunities are difficult because they're busy working, right? They're sat there in front of their computer. So people may not agree, but my advice: make the coffee.
I agree. I'd also say, you know, I've had a lot of trainees in the past whose sort of viewing history has been mainly Game of Thrones and Marvel films, and there's 130 years of cinema history that you can delve into. You know, I've been brainwashing my kids since the age of 2 with Charlie Chaplin and Laurel and Hardy and stuff, and you know, in lockdown we've been watching Hitchcock movies and screwball comedies and all sorts of stuff. You know, it's like but yeah, go off and watch some Tarkovsky and Kurosawa and Fellini or whatever, you know, and all that great German new cinema and the stuff from the 70s, and there's so much really bold stuff, Nicholas Roeg movies and whatever, you know. It just immerse yourself in all of that and sort of get to know all that stuff, and go and watch some contemporary dance or go to a gig or whatever, you know, just sort of immerse yourself in culture, and it all sort of percolates and informs what you do.
Thank you so much. And I can see that Simon has just cracked a beer. So it feels like we might be heading towards the more casual Q&A part of the evening. But first of all, I've got 3 quick questions. What's your favorite quick questions? What's your one favorite Avid shortcut you could not do without? If it's not mapped, you're lost. Meredith.
The ejector seat.
I'm an editor, I promise. No. Probably match frame. Match frame is like my most favorite. And somebody just wrote Command Z, which is also
someone else wrote Apple Q. Right. Yeah, is yours reverse match frame, considering you work in those?
Yeah. Also, I mean, I haven't really got a favourite, you know, that's sort of one that I'm particularly fond of. But I've sort of re-engineered the keyboard completely because I can touch type. So I moved the sort of motion stuff over to the left. So every time I'm typing something, I don't have to do that. I could just do that. Yeah.
What about you, Simon?
Mine is one that not many people use, not many people know. It's called Trim to Fill, and it's a stupid name. It doesn't make any sense. But if you drop this effect onto a clip, the clip no longer rolls out when you use the trim functions. This is really geeky now, so only people that use Avid will understand all of these words. So we'll try and get past it quickly for those that don't use Avid. But when you use the trim function, instead of rolling the clip out, it lengthens the clip, or it lengthens the clip or shortens the clip in speed. So you can make moments last as long or as short as you like. And I feel that when I've got past the assembly stage and I'm into fine cutting, it's about rhythm and timing and pauses and that tool. When I discovered that, I didn't discover that until I was working on National Treasure. When I discovered that, it suddenly opened up how I use material in a way that, you know, it was like next level of understanding what I could do as an editor. Lots of people don't use it. Assistants can get quite frustrated with it. Online editors definitely hate me. But yeah, trim to fill for me.
And I'm going to answer as well. Mine's add edit, actually. I couldn't add edit. I use so much that yeah. So we've come to the sort of end of our formal section with the questions we had prior to starting. Now, just before we go into the general Q&A, I just wanted to say that if you are, this tonight is brought to us by BECTU and the Rough Assembly, and if you are not already a member, I believe that there is a deal at the moment you can join for £7.50 per month. If you happen to be unemployed and there is a little bit of difficulty for you as regards doing that, then I think there is a number to call for BECTU, and I will ask Nia to either put it in the chat box, or if you can text it to me and I will read it out. But we would love anyone who's not already a member to join. So the Q&A box, we've got it here. I think you guys can see it as well. So shall I go through and choose questions, or do you want to search for ones you want to answer? How shall we proceed? Let's see.
You're doing a great job at this, Emma. So why don't you carry on choosing the questions?
It's like, you just do it.
You're doing you really are. You're doing a great job.
One of the questions we've got, which is really pertinent to what's going on at the moment, from Rachel Holt is, are you still editing from home? Obviously, Simon, you are. And the question is, are you still editing from home, or have your projects finished for the time being? So whereabouts is everybody in the scheme of things at the moment?
I finished a job like days before. I finished on that Mark Munden job that I did with Simon days before lockdown started. So yeah, I haven't done anything since, which has actually been, I've been working I've been very fortunate. I've worked pretty solidly for the last 3 or 4 years. And so I was really ready for a break. And so I'm really loving it, actually. I probably shouldn't say that. An awful lot of people are suffering rather than tens of thousands of people are dying, but I'm having a lovely time.
Meredith.
I'm lucky. I'm on a series called The Watch, which is 3 blocks. I'm doing the second block. For those of you who don't know what a block is basically there's 8 episodes and they've done it. So the first editor and director did the first 2. I'm doing the middle 3, and then there's another editor and director doing the back 3. It's very common to shoot that way, particularly in England. I don't know about the US. Anyway, so we only had 8 days left of the entire shoot. So they were shooting from September, and then we got all the way to 8 days left, and they were like, you know, they tried to finish, but they were just, we can't do it. So but that's the 3rd block. So luckily most of my stuff is done. So I'm still working. I'll probably be working until the beginning of June. And then I don't know. So how I'm doing is basically Salon, who are the hire company, they moved my whole kit from Molinare in town to my dining room table. So I've got everything here that I need, and my director he FaceTimes me all day, every day. It's like he's in the room. It's brilliant. And I just prop the computer, my little laptop, like right next to the viewing monitor so he can see. And it's great though, because I think some of the stuff that gets lost when you're at home, because I'm in the fine cut, not the assembly. And he's a director who likes to be in the room all the time. So it's a great way for us to work together, even though we can't be together. And then also you can sort of say, actually, I need to go do whatever for an hour, and that's fine. And I found the transition to be as smooth as could possibly be expected under the circumstances. If I was going to set up a project from the start at home, I would do lots of things differently. But this has been great. Salon have been fantastic. And yeah, so just taking over until sort of we're on the last step now, and then who knows.
Yeah. And Simon, are you in fine cut in the garden?
No. So I finished my episode of the series that Dan's on before Christmas, and then we had a baby in January. So I stopped working and planned to go back to work around April. Obviously, that's not happening. I've had a few interviews. Like I had one yesterday, one the day before, one last week. I think there's a few things happening. You know, people are using this time to meet with people and have chats and introductions. Sometimes you're meeting for it and you're not quite sure if the job is actually, going to go ahead. Maybe there's a little bit of it where there's people justifying their job a little bit by having the interview with you. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, this isn't ever going to happen. But it's good to meet a lot of people. I've had a lot of scripts to read, so that's how I'm using that's the productive side of my time, I guess.
I see. And so
Emma, what are you doing? Are you working?
No, I'm off. I was on a show, and we took, as soon as it all kind of went to what it was, we just sort of put the brakes on, and I'm on episodic at the moment, and there wasn't quite enough shot of my episodes, so just waiting, just passing the time, playing Nintendo and walking my dogs, basically. So we have a question from someone, Stephanie. She's asking about segueing from cutting factual and documentary to television drama or comedy. She says it seems impossible. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the path that any of us have followed, but I just thought I would throw that question out there because it's definitely a question that comes up at events like these, people desiring to try drama. Does anyone have any insight into that or suggestions?
If you're willing to, the only thing I could possibly suggest would be that you may have to take a couple of assisting jobs, unless you can get a good agent who can get you in, or because before the pandemic there was quite a lot of work going on, so it might be a good time to do that. I don't have any other. I started in drama. I'm still in drama. Really sorry.
Sorry.
I was going to say, if you're lucky enough to, and this is just as rare, but find documentary directors who also work in drama, then attaching yourself with them might find your way across. So say you are on documentaries and there is a director who does both. I'd as a documentary director chase down as a documentary editor, chase down that director, establish a relationship with them, and then try and work with them on dramas. Mm-hmm. But that's, a pun. It's like, I think it is very difficult, and I think the whole way we do it is very different. The idea of dailies is completely different on a documentary. The idea of how you craft a scene and a story is way harder on a documentary. Documentary editors are doing so much more writing than we are, in drama. So I think it's very hard.
I do think part of me does think, assembling or short films or anything that demonstrates the desire to move to drama, that's really important. That was really important when I moved from assisting to editing. It's the proof that you want to be cutting and stuff, and it's also something I think that feeds into what we were talking about before in actually vocalizing it as well. It's a really big thing, like saying the words, I would like to work in drama. I mean, we have amongst our community of editors, I think we do know people who cut different things, and so talking to people, making it clear that it's what you'd like to do. They may not have something for you right away, but maybe in a little while they might. And I think vocalizing things is important, and also demonstrating the desire to move is super important as well.
Finding really good shorts to cut is quite tricky, though, isn't it? It's sort of, I mean, the good one, when I was still assisting, the good shorts that came my way all came from other editors. People would approach them and say, could you do something? And they would palm them off on me or other people like me. So yeah, I mean, I think what Meredith said, going back to assisting, that won't fill anybody with sort of, that won't please anybody saying that, but it's like, but all of us got our breaks from the editors that we were working with, you know. So
I have a very specific question for you, actually, Dan. It's someone's asking how you managed to work your way to editing the higher budget TV shows. They were like, they've looked at your IMDb and they're wondering how you moved up through the different things to be cutting on things like Peaky Blinders and
it took a long time. It took a really long time. Like I said, like 2005, I first started cutting, and I was really scratching around to do bits and bobs. I did Cranford with Fran Parker, which did really, really well, and I thought that was it. I was a made guy, and I'd be able to get an agent and all that sort of stuff. And then the financial crash happened in 2008, and it was deadly for years. You know, there was one year I worked 11 weeks, spent the rest of the time doing up a flat. You know, it was awful. But yeah, I mean, I was in those little sort of filler in jobs that I was doing. I worked with a guy called, I helped to do a cut down on a movie for a director called John Ridley. And he remembered me. He's actually based in the States, and he came back to do a show called Gorilla in London. And he remembered me, and he got me to cut all of his episodes. And it was an enormous break. I was really floundering and getting nowhere for a long time. And then he just plucked me from obscurity. I did about 2 weeks of prep before the interview for that job, and I went along, and he wasn't even there. It was the executive producer, Katie Swindon, was there, and I was like, "Where's John? I've done all this prep for this interview, and he's not even here." And she was like, "As far as he's concerned, you're doing it." And she was just checking me out because she was like, "Who is this nobody that we've got doing this show?" But as I'd done so much prep and read all the books about that subject, you know, she couldn't possibly trip me up. So I got the job. And off the back of that, I mean, that was a really distinctive show. And Katie knew all the Peaky Blinders people, and I begged her to put in a good word for me, and I got the opening block on the next series of Peaky Blinders. And from then on, it was just sort of plain sailing. That was like the best, I think, one of the best seasons of Peaky Blinders, and then the phone hasn't stopped ringing since. You know, it's sort of. It's also about it's about choosing what it is about. You know, we were talking about earlier about doing the scripts that you're attracted to. It's about, you know, choosing those projects well, and the power of no is very important. You know, if you turn down the stuff you don't want to do, then it's so busy, or it was so busy before all this happened, that something better would come along.
Mm. And I proactively chase jobs. Yeah,
Simon's really good at this stuff. Talk to him.
I try and find out what's being made and what I'd like to work on. I mean, BECTU publish every quarter or maybe every month, but they do publish early bird documents of everything that's coming up, you know, and I read those every time they come out and keep an eye on like Deadline and Variety and so on what shows are coming out. There was a job, you know, I was chasing recently that I was desperate to get, that I don't think will happen now because of the world situation. But yeah, I tend to look quite early for what's coming up.
Yeah. We've had a few people ask the questions about agents, actually. How do you get them? Do you really need them? So I think that's an interesting question to answer. Simon, how did you get your first agent?
Oh, it's horrible, isn't it? Like, I cut on National Treasure, which was very well received. I think the director won a BAFTA. The other editor, you know, who'd given me that chance to cut an episode, he got nominated for a BAFTA. It was a huge show, and I thought, like Dan said with Cranford, I thought, oh, now I'm a made man. Now, like, I'll just be able to get an agent. And you know, I went for bunches of meetings and got knocked back, and even before that, like, got knocked back loads. I mean, I don't think this is helpful, because the way that I got very lucky and got an opportunity with an agent is that same editor. I should name him because, you know, he's done so much for me, really. But so Luke Dunkley said to me, you know, you should talk to my agent Ellie, and he'd been with Ellie for a long time, and Ellie met with me, and she gave me a break and said that she'd help me out. So that's how I got my agent. It was really tough. Also now, I couldn't be happy with my agent. There's so many people I know who hate their agents and have bad things to say about their agents. But I'm very lucky to be with Echo artists, and so is Dan. Dan's with Echo, I think they do great stuff for me.
They're awesome.
What about you, Meredith?
I did this quite recently. Last year, same. I was sort of like, I've got an editor credit, and I come back off Thrones, and I had these big assembly credits, and I spoke to some of the editors that I work with who put me in touch with their agents, and I met with loads and loads of people. I met with loads and loads of agents who went, come back in 3 years. Which is fine, because the thing is that, you have to see it from an agent's perspective, which is that if they don't know how to market you, like if you're not making money, they're not making money. That's the truth. So they're looking at you and saying, can I hire this person out on a job? And with the credits that you have, I don't think I can. I have to trust they know the industry. And then eventually, I met with someone who went, yeah, we'll take a punt. Redo your CV like this, or we're going to put it like this. And one of the best pieces of advice they gave me, because I had listed the sort of bigger credit. So I listed my Save Me editor credit first, and then I listed sort of my assembly credits like Poldark and Thrones and Deepwater and that kind of stuff, because they were bigger jobs. But she was like, no, you need to put your short films further up. Anything that you have a lead editor credit, you need to put further up. And I was like, oh, right, I did, so that was a big piece of advice. And then, because a lot of people also say that when they got their agents, like a lot of their jobs were still coming from them. Because the truth is that when you have an agent, you pay them regardless of who got you the job. That's how it works, because they do all the negotiating for you, the paperwork, they do it. That's just how it works. So even if it's a job that you got off your own back, you still have to pay your agent. And a lot of people say that this is how it works for years. With mine, to be honest, and I think some of it's timing, because the industry was so busy last year, she got me all the interviews with people that I didn't know and all this kind. So she got me my first two interviews, my first two editing gigs. She got me the third one I got because of the first one. So I only knew them because I'd done Silent Witness. So for me, it's worked out great. But yeah, I would just say, like, if you're far enough along in your career that you have editors who will back you, a word from them to their agent, if they're willing to do that for you, is always helpful. But just try and meet with as many people as you can who will meet with you. Meet everybody who will meet with you, even if they don't take you on, because maybe eventually they will, or maybe you start with an agent that's smaller, and then you can, I know people who have switched once they sort of, because agents have niches as well. So, if they're not getting big enough projects, eventually you might have to move somewhere else. But
it definitely takes time. And I think, definitely when I was moving to editing, one of the questions I got asked, have you got an agent yet? Who's your agent? Have you got an agent? Like, that question was like, an episode of The Simpsons where you hear things come over and over in your head, and it's like sort of like a horror show as Barney burps in your ear or something like that. Like, it was just constantly this, you got an agent? Who's your agent? Who are you with? You don't have an agent? So it's definitely not an easy thing. And I found that once I got an agent, I felt like there was kind of like a breath that I could take, that, oh, there are people who kind of believe in me and will help me a little bit, and I have a little bit of a team now. And it's a nice feeling. But for anyone who is wondering or trying to get someone, it definitely takes time. It's no fast thing.
And it takes a lot of, it's not just time, it takes a lot of like meeting someone and thinking that went well, and then them saying no thanks.
I've got a great question here, which I think is really interesting from Stuart Davies. He's written, we often hear about actors struggling to cope with green screen and acting to tennis balls for eyeline reference. He's just wondering how VFX heavy shows like Chernobyl, Dark Materials, Game of Thrones affect the way the scenes are edited emotionally speaking. So you've got green screen, you've got actors performing, you've got a whole bunch of stuff. Does it affect how things are edited emotionally? Oh, Simon. You're all just waiting. Who's going to answer this one?
Yeah, can I bat this one away? I don't know, actually. Like, I guess there's some actors that are great at it, you know, all the actors that you see. I do look at the Marvel films and the behind the scenes stuff. I've never worked on anything like that. And I think, how on earth do they do it? Like, I don't know how those actors are doing what they're doing, where they're able to pull that from, because it's funny, because on other sets, you know, they're fussing over the reality of what's going on to get the feeling that they need, and then you go and you see Avengers, and they've done it all in a green screen studio and still done great performances. So why did they need all that other stuff to make them feel comfortable? I don't know. I can't really speak to how actors do what they do. I'm in awe of it, really, when they do it.
I think does it change the way it's edited emotionally, basically, with the green screen? How did you find it, Dan? I mean, in his Dark Materials, people are supposed to have their, I can't remember what they're called, and I love the books. What are they called? Their spirits?
Spirit animals.
Oh, it's a demon, but with an
Demon.
A.
Everyone's like, the number of people who are like, I know what they're called. Thank you. Demons. They're demons.
Well, they did a very clever thing on, there's actually a making of on the iPlayer at the moment. And they did a really clever thing. They would basically block scenes out with puppeteers. They had puppeteers who were really, really skilled. And every demon had its own articulated puppet, and they would actually move it through the scene. So, or they'd interact with you and get all the timing of everything right for the first 3 takes. And then they do it again without those puppets there. But then you sort of comp it together using the earlier takes. You know, you just do a little animat and stick that animal into the one that the animal wasn't in, for all of the timing and stuff. And everybody was able to remember, just real pros. You know, the cast are really great. The camera operator would remember exactly how to move in order to sort of take that now sort of absent creature into account. You know, it's very clever. But you know, I mean, the sort of the things that we're working on, the actors are just amazing. They can just conjure it from nothing, and they're sort of. I don't think I've ever really thought to myself something was tricky to cut because there was nothing to react to. You know, and that includes working on, like, I mean, you've done loads of Marvel movies and stuff like that, but. When I worked on Harry Potter 4, you know, I would cut in the sort of all the green screen stuff. Yeah, they're just good directors and great cast. You know, they managed to get it. They squeeze it out of nowhere.
Definitely. Meredith, how did you find it on Game of Thrones? You worked like The Long Night or something like that, you know, with the dragons and
I worked on
walkers.
The Long Night, Battle of the Bastards, and all these kinds of things. It's a huge amount of prep, not on editorial's part, but the directors and the producers, and we got, which you don't always get in television, it depends on how big your budget is. I think you normally get it on features and stuff. We get all the pre-animation, which is basically like just a really rudimentary animated version. It looks like sort of a video game that came out in 1991. Like version of things that are happening, so that you know what this sort of, and then that's how the director kind of makes his or her decisions based on that, and you're a little bit hamstrung by it. I think the biggest thing I've always found watching people, because I have some visual effects sequences in this, but it's not the same as that kind of thing. And so when I was working with Tim, who cut those episodes, like there's always this like balance of the story and the spectacle, because you've also got the visual effects department saying we want more of this and we want more of that. It doesn't, really tell the story emotionally, but they're not thinking in that way. They're just like, yeah, but the shot looks cool. And I'm like, yeah, but it hangs around too long. And also just the sort of, Thrones isn't like the Marvel movies either, in the way that like there's not wholly animated, you know, there's not Rocket Raccoon, or, you know, there's not those kinds of wholly animated characters. Like all the characters are people, and even the characters that are CG, the giants and stuff, like there's still a man doing that performance. And when they did the dragons, they had massive, if you're riding the dragons, they had massive, it kind of looks like a mechanical bull kind of sort of thing, but like massive and green.
How you tried to act it out like we were gonna guess it.
I know, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing.
You know, like
yeah, you know, you'll just recognize it from my, yeah. And then when I was assisting, like a big part of my job was to do slap comps of dragon stuff into scenes so that you know what the timing of something is and you know what the sort of emotion of something is. But the editors would always cut for the emotion of the scene, and the actors are anchoring that somewhere. So you're still tethering it to real world stuff. So it's always been, the story and the emotion is still, I think, largely the same as it is when you're editing a two-hander. Like you're looking for the same threads, the same.
We have a question about NDAs and confidentiality and stuff. Like, question is, any tips on keeping NDAs? Which I kind of love.
Just don't.
Any tips
about your work? I don't think.
It's literally, you just can't talk about stuff. You just can't. And it's, I don't know how you guys find it, but I have worked on several features where, Marvel features, where you can't talk about that stuff, and it's kind of like you just don't. And if people ask you, you just say, you know, I can't really talk about that, or, you know, it can be hard. But keeping NDAs, I kind of love that question. Any tips for just?
Most people
how do you hold it in?
Yeah, most people who ask you about that stuff, like your close friends and families, they don't ask you that stuff because they know it's your job.
Yeah, like
it's always just some guy at the pub who's like, yeah, but you know, and then you're just like, I can't really talk. I wouldn't tell you anyway because I don't know you, like. Yeah. But yeah, and just resist Instagramming and tweeting about stuff. It happens on everything I've ever been on. Somebody will just do something and you're like, why did you do that? Mm-hmm. Never from editorial.
Yeah, it's just it can be quite hard, but you're right. People who are close to you or know what you do won't ask you. People in the industry won't really ask you either. Like it's all pretty quiet. It's usually, if you've got someone asking you, they don't get what you do, and eventually I'm sure they will if they're an important part of your life. They just well, you just can't talk about stuff. You just can't. But I kind of love that.
So most people, like, the thing is, I learned a very important lesson when I was 8. And my brother begged me to tell him what he's getting for his birthday, and I told him, and he punched me. And the truth is that people don't want spoilers.
That's really funny. So we've got a question about bad feedback. So you've spent some time, you've cut a scene. Bad feedback. How does that? You've taken time out. How does bad feedback go down, Simon?
I think I take bad feedback really well because I'm quite happy to receive it. I remember, so when I was just starting out, the first film I worked on, I was really lucky. The director on that kind of took me under his wing and you know, was very generous to me and you know, very supportive, would give me lots of advice and stuff like that. And he had a screening one night, and I asked him, because he got a load of feedback from the screening, and he, even stuff I overheard, and I was like, oh, that's really insulting. How dare they ask him that, you know? And he was like, no, feedback's just a way that you can make things better. You know, why would you not want to make your film better? Listen to any feedback that anyone's wanting to give you. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to act on it. But like, if someone's offering you some feedback, please tell me what you think about my car. So I like feedback. if someone watches something, if they're happy to give me feedback, you know, I'll really listen to it and ask some questions back and try and listen to what it is that they're saying. Even if, I mean, we as editors, I think we all become, we have this ability to diagnose the feedback as to what is really the cause of the feedback. You know, what are they really getting at? You have to really listen to what they're saying to work out what it is that's bothering them, because often, and that director said the same thing to me at the time, he said, listen to what they're saying. It doesn't mean they know what they know, like the right thing, or it doesn't mean that they're even saying the right thing, but listen to what they're saying and then diagnose it afterwards. You develop that as a skill.
Mm-hmm. Dan, what about you and bad feedback?
I'm going to do, from now on, I'm going to do what Simon does. That sounds amazing. If I get bad feedback or somebody criticizes my work, I have a dark night of the soul where I just tear myself to pieces, basically.
You know you're good, Dan.
Huh?
What, you know you're good. That's the thing. I guess I'm just too happy in the process and thinking, oh yeah, I know I can do this. You know, I know how to do this. You've worked on great shows, so if they give you bad feedback, they need to go and look at your IMDb.
Yeah, generally, when you get to the heart of why you're getting bad feedback, it's usually there's something else going on. You know, I mean, I've had, you know, in those dark days there wasn't hardly anything going on, and I was doing all sorts of crap, working for people who weren't terribly talented and basically crooks. You know, if they give you bad feedback, it's generally because somebody else fucked up.
Mm-hmm. Bing, bing, bing. I think that's our first swear word of the night, people.
Oh,
that's exciting. Everyone take a drink. No, I'm joking.
9:10.
9:10. Yeah, we're past the watershed. Excellent.
Past the watershed.
And Meredith, what about you? Bad feedback.
The principle surrounding it is, I totally agree with Simon on, both about the fact that, you know, it's a collaborative thing and you want to make it better, and also that often when somebody's telling you something, they don't necessarily have the language even to identify the problem that they're having, much less a solution. However, my actual emotional arc with getting feedback is, I hate all of this, I'm not doing it, and then you just sort of sit down and do it. It's fine, actually. It's, you don't have to be such a baby about it, but that's, you know, that's an internal conversation. Like, yeah, in the room, you're just like, yeah, it's fine, no problem. Like,
Great. Someone's asked an interesting question about diplomacy, and it's if you want to propose something different to a director. So you're cutting something. We've had questions about like the script writing process that happens in the edit when you're cutting a scene and you sort of adjust things, or you sort of change things, or you skew perspective or script. And it's all really interesting stuff. And this one here about proposing to the director something different from their vision, or trying to tell them that something's not quite working. What's your best tip for that? I think that's a really great question.
choose your moment. And always show them what they want to see first, and have your version in your pocket for later.
Yeah, both.
It's tricky. I mean, you know, I've been very lucky to work with some really great directors who just they don't tell you what they want at all. You know, they're very, very open to you reinventing something. They're very open to your take on it. You know, because you can always go back to what they wanted. You can always engineer it towards what they wanted, but you might come up with a better solution. So yeah, I mean, my first assembly, I'll always try and put it together the way I think it should be. And if that's not what they wanted, we can always do what they wanted. But I don't, you know, but you're right. I mean, you have to choose your moment. You have to sort of go through the process. And you can only really, if you have a different take on something, you can only really say it once. So you have to choose your moment. You know, you can't sort of bang on about something you feel strongly about. You have to present it at the right moment. And if it gets knocked back, you might, you know, several weeks down the line, if you still think you're right and there are other things that it would solve as well, you keep going around in circles, you can probably mention it once more. But yeah, you can't bang on about something.
I think some people have asked here about the collaboration with directors, and I do think that with a lot of the shows that you guys are working on, particularly in the last few years, 5 years or whatever, I think editors and directors, there is an expectation of collaboration between each other, isn't there? It's definitely, it's not someone sitting next to you snapping their fingers and saying cut there, cut there. It's there's collaboration. That's crucial, I think, isn't it? Like we've got a few questions about that.
Yeah, I think you get a strong sense of the director when you go in for your interview, and you can pointedly ask them questions about how they like to work. And if you think they're going to be controlling or a bully or not a fully functioning human being, then walk away from it.
Someone's asked if it's ignoring the pandemic. We'll just ignore it. Is it a good time to start in drama?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's never been a better time to start in the UK TV drama.
Yeah.
Before the pandemic, like there was so much work, like you can't find an assistant. Like it is really, and also like really interesting things as well. It's not like, because it used to be this sort of rift between film and television, but I think it's closing because there's so much interesting television going on as well now.
I definitely think that's the case. I definitely think there's so much great drama.
If you want to cut, go the TV route rather than the film route.
Yeah. Yeah, agree.
I can I add to that? Like I am concerned that we are in a boom time, though, ignoring the pandemic. We're in a boom time, and this may not last. So people should not get oh god, it's really depressing me saying this, but not get too comfortable with how it is at the moment in the UK. There's one big reason for that, and that's a lot of the money at the moment, I think, in TV is speculative, like VC money and money that has come from people that are trying to win the streaming game and the platform game. Disney, Facebook, YouTube, Apple TV, Netflix, everyone, right? Everyone's got their own platform. That money is not coming from the product. It's all speculative because they want to win the game. So I do worry that when a few years from now, when we've kind of got through this era of boom,
when there's one streaming service to rule them all, sort of thing.
Yeah. I don't know that this will go on. I worry that it's like, the TV at the moment, it's like the .com bubble. Like I worry that that's the case.
Thank you. Someone has asked, would it find it easier? Sorry, I'm getting messages. What about editing on set? Have you guys edited on set before?
Yeah, I have.
Oh, that didn't sound like a happy.
Horrible. It was really horrible. Yeah, sorry, my daughter's just waving at me. That was on Cuban Fury again. It was like I had an Ethernet cable going into the back of Video Village, and I would download, when they shouted cut, I would copy over the last slate. And like I say, they were shooting 4 cameras at a time. And basically, by the time I had managed to group all those 4 together and start to break them down, they'd already finished another one. And then 10 minutes later, somebody would be over at my Avid saying, can I have a look at it yet? I'd be like, what have you cut together so far? And I'd be like, I've got 1 slate. So, so yeah, it was, and this was all happening in a car park, in a multi-story car park in Hayes, kind of thing. It was deeply unpleasant. Basically, when the shoot was over, I went back to the cutting rooms and I started from scratch on everything again, because everything I'd done in that car park in Hayes was completely pointless. There was just no time to keep up. I had no assistant with me or anything.
I think people that are drawn to the cutting room are not the people that are drawn to set life. So like I think I've not cut on set before, but I think there's a reason that I like working in the cutting room. I'd rather be in the cutting room. You know, I like the community, and I like the pace, and I like how we do things. I do love to visit set. You know, I visit set on any production that I can. I do like to see things going, but I find there's directors that you can tell prefer set, and there's directors that prefer the edit, and I definitely feel an affinity with those that prefer the edit.
So there are still questions to be answered, but we're coming to, I think, the end of our time. We're hitting the end of our second hour. So I thought that I would ask, what has been your favorite, like ending on a positive note, what has been your favorite or best experience working on a job? It could be something that you cracked cutting, like you just were like, I have cracked this cutting it, or it could have been from when you're an assistant and you learned to load. What personally do you sort of hold close to yourself as one of your favorites? Because I've pulled this question out of the ether, I'm going to say that I worked on the film Fury. I was the first assistant editor, and I didn't really have the job until literally the job was on. And we were suddenly in the middle of England, and muddy, and there were tanks everywhere. We were on location for like a few months, and I was grubby every day. But it was just myself and the editor, and we had a team in Los Angeles, but it was just myself and the editor on set. It was grubby every day, but we saw tanks every day. We saw the actors. We were sort of a part of something, but had our own private, you know, we had like a shipping container that we were working from, and it was joyful. It was just joyful. So hard. So I was like so dirty constantly because of the mud, and it was winter, but it was such a joy. So Dan, what for you would be best experience or best memories, or just something about the job that just you hold close?
Well, my favorite sort of editing experience was when I was working on Guerrilla, and I cut there's an absolutely enormous riot scene in episode 1, and it took me 4 days to put together a first assembly, and I really felt like I'd done a great job of it. It was something that I was really, really proud of, especially as the director phoned me at the end of the day and said, we screwed up, we ran out of time, we didn't get enough. It culminated in the police running in and beating up this guy, and they had no coverage whatsoever. And he said, over to you, see what you can do. And I came up with the solution that made that work. Basically, every time this guy got hit with a truncheon, I cut to black and then cut back again to the next hit. And it had the effect of, you thought you were about to see this really brutal attack on this guy. And I actually watched it in an auditorium with like there was a sort of a press screening or a sort of a publicity thing. I watched it in an auditorium of people, and when it cut to black, there was sort of a sigh of relief from the audience, thinking that they were going to be spared having to watch this thing. But then when it cut back to them, everybody was just screaming. There were literally people screaming in the audience, which was like, I think I did quite a good job of that. You know, if everybody felt like it was that visceral, then that was quite satisfying. But that's not really a sort of that's the bit of editing that I'm most proud of. But my sort of most heartwarming experience was when I went to Chicago on the preview of Harry Potter 4. And you know how they recruit people blind. They sort of, there was an audience of 500 kids and their parents and carers or whatever, and the marketing guy stood up the front and said, "You're all very lucky because you're here to see Harry." And he got as far as saying Harry Potter, and the place erupted. It was like a rock concert, you know. And so everybody at the back of the room was just like smiling from ear to ear, thinking, oh, we're really working on something which is giving people a lot of joy.
Oh, how lovely. How lovely. What about yourself, Simon?
So I think the day I found out that I got the job on Chernobyl was a big change for me. I feel that I'd worked on that series National Treasure, which was a big deal, you know, and I thought that show was amazing. But after that, I, struggled a bit more for work. I think the second job as an editor can often be super difficult to get in different ways from the first job. And I spent a few years just editing, TV that I was proud of and that I enjoyed and so on. But I felt I was really, using that as a step to get to where I wanted to be. So then when Chernobyl happened, that was like, oh, I was so happy. That was a show that 2 years before Chernobyl, I was working on stuff that I probably wouldn't choose to watch, or I know I wouldn't choose to watch. It's not stuff that I'd seek out to watch. Chernobyl was the first thing for 2 years where I was like, this is a show I want to watch and I want to work on. So it was getting that job.
Oh, great. Meredith, what about yourself?
I would say there's a couple of things. One, like, non-specific one is just really whenever I've made something and someone says to me, I watched that and I enjoyed it. I watched that with my kid, and weirdly the most positive feedback I've ever had on anything, particularly from Americans, was about this show Harley and the Davidsons, which was free to Discovery, and for whatever reason, like, every American has seen it. I have no idea why. And people are constantly like, did you work on that? I saw your name on that. I was really, really enjoyed that. I watched it with my kid. I watched it with my dad. And that's always a really nice thing. But I think for me, when I got my first gig last year, because I had gone to the interview, and I didn't really know how the interview went. Like, I left and I was like, oh, that was the thing. And I've been to a couple of other really good interviews that I didn't get. So I was like, well, and then they called and said that I had it. And I was supposed to, my husband was working away, and I was supposed to go to the States for 3 weeks to stay with him. And I was ringing him, and I was like, guess what? I can't come. I got this gig. And it was just really lovely, because it was really, he's never been so psyched about me not going on holiday.
That's great. We have had a couple of questions just come through that I can't speak to this personally, but it's about going back to work after having children and experiences. Simon, you've just had a baby and we're taking some time off.
Number three.
Number three,
yeah.
So you've had a baby and heading back to work after that and stuff. I can't speak to this as I don't have children. I've been on panels where women have spoken about this, but I can't give so much insight. So to parents, how have you found that work for you? Has it been okay or difficult, or colleague stories?
So for me, I've taken long periods off when we've had the baby. So like when we had our second child, I think I had about 4 months off. The plan was to take about 4 months off with the third child. I guess that this is, or should be more, towards women. I think it's much, much, much harder on women, and I think all of us as an edit community, we should support people in having kids, fathers and mothers. We should support that as much as we can. On Chernobyl, I feel we were really lucky. Everyone had kids. The director had kids. The execs all had kids, and we all kept our weekends. We all, we weren't in the edit late. I think most 90% of the time I was leaving the cutting room at 6 p.m.
Wow.
So I think we should all strive to help each other out with that. What's funny is then that doesn't chime with people that always, it does with some, but I definitely know that there's editors out there who have got no interest in having kids and don't really have any sympathy for people that do have kids either. I've got a lot of sympathy for people that do have kids.
I was on a panel last year with, I mean, unless I don't want to talk over anyone, I was on a panel last year which was several female editors, and this question came up, and it was two of the editors spoke, they both had kids, and they just said they were really strict about things. So they had certain hours they could have daycare and the balance of what they could do with their husbands, and then it was kind of like, I'll start work at 9:30 but I have to leave at 5:30, and so if I take this job, that's the parameter I have to set down, basically. And I thought that was, I don't know, it's kind of owning that fact from the get-go and just sort of setting the parameters immediately seemed to be, for two of those women, crucially important. So do you guys set parameters like that when you work now? Do you have times that you want to work? Do you have trains to catch? Do you have guitars to make? Do you have things that you have to do that basically means you set parameters before jobs start?
Yeah, I mean, I usually negotiate holidays. If I've got a holiday booked, always mention that right from the get-go. Don't try and sort of get the job and then mention it a month later, because it just won't happen, So, but yeah, you can sort of, if they want you badly enough, then they will accommodate you. Yeah, so you should be upfront about all that stuff. I don't know why we can't have more job shares for parents in post, and I don't know. Maybe we're all going to be working more remotely from now. While this pandemic plays out, if we have any work. So maybe that will. I don't know how that will. That might actually just make things more stressful for people who are parents. Because they've got kids at home. I don't know. It's tricky. It's really tricky. But I think that I've been very lucky in that I've been able to kind of set my own hours. A lot of the time, I don't try not to work long hours, because I think it's really counterproductive. You need to be sharp in order to do the job well. You need to be able to think laterally, and you can't do that if you're overtired. And I've certainly noticed, I'm like in my late 40s now. I can't work like I used to when I was 25. So you have to just be sensible and look after yourself, and make sure that your crew around you are sort of, they're able to sort of stick up for themselves, and you help them to stick up for themselves as well. Be reasonable about the hours that you work.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add or want to say anything as we finish up for the evening?
I just want to say one quick thing. I did a talk for a high school in upstate New York for their film society. And I posted this like a few months ago, and I posted this on Twitter, and I think some of them got tickets. So if you're there from Baker High School, thanks for in Syracuse, up near Syracuse, New York. That's a bunch of kids have been watching this, hopefully tonight.
That's great.
I'd like to say hello to Stephen Worsley and Anna Rita Silva, who are online as well.
It is lovely that we have had friends tune in, and we've had lots of our community tune in. It is really nice. I'm not working tomorrow. I'm going to walk my dogs and read a book, because that's what my lockdown procedure is. Meredith, are you working tomorrow?
Oh yeah.
Working tomorrow. Simon, what are you going to do tomorrow?
No, not working tomorrow, but I do like thank you for BECTU for putting this on, and Emma, you've done a cracking job. Thank you for
absolutely always
hosting this. I like talking about this kind of stuff. I like learning about this kind of stuff. I like hearing what other people have to say. I do spend a lot of time on Twitter and the avid groups and that on Facebook. So people can find me there and continue any of this there quite happily.
Yeah, can I just say, Alex Rendell posted a question that we haven't asked. He was the first AD on trigonometry, and Alex, if you want to get in touch with me afterwards, I'll answer that question for you if you like.
What's the question, Dan?
So yeah, we all want to know now.
He's going into producing, and he wants to talk about how editors interact with producers and execs. But Alex, if you will have my email from the unit list or my number, just give me a bell.
Perfect, thank you. So as we mentioned earlier, this was presented by BECTU and the Rough Assembly. BECTU is the Union for Creatives and Broadcasting Professionals. in the UK, and the Rough Assembly is the Post-Production and Facilities branch. Now, the Rough Assembly, the Post-Production and Facilities branch, has been doing a lot in the last few years. This is one of many events that have been held over the last few years to create a sense of community and participation and discussion about our craft and about the way we live and work. The committee has produced rate cards, which are hugely successful, are updated yearly, and I think cover a broad range of categories and genre, like drama, factual, short jobs as well. I don't want to say short jobs, short form jobs as well. The committee has also been part and parcel of negotiating with PACT to create better deals for film and also create better deals in the TV side of things as well. And at the moment, one of our very panelists tonight is part of the committee with BECTU, who is making discussion and suggestions on how we all go back to work safely. So there is a lot of stuff happening aside from these events, which we have to be really grateful. I'm not a member of the committee of BECTU, and I'm really grateful that they're doing that work, so thank you. If you would like to join the union and you are not already a member, then it is £7.50 at the moment. I'm sure someone will post a link. Someone, maybe I could. Shall I do it? Let me see, post a couple of links into the chat. No, the chat's not coming up to me, it's not interested. So you can join at the moment for £7.50. Next week, I'm just going to read this from my phone. Sarah Putt is doing a negotiation masterclass. It's happening all of next week with other industry-based sessions. It's for BECTU members only, so check your emails tomorrow or Friday. And next week, we have another one of these Wednesday webinars, which is presented by BECTU and the Rough Assembly, and it's called Breaking Into Post. And it's quite exciting. I think it's going to be hosted by a couple of the more junior members of our industry, which is really interesting. It'll be great to have some of their insight as new voices in the industry and people experiencing things. I've been in the industry for 20 years, so it's, you know, things definitely change. So it's exciting. It's exciting to know. So Dan, Simon, Meredith, thank you all so much for your time tonight and for your insight and for your answers and for your patience and going through everything. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much to BECTU and the Rough Assembly for putting us on. It's been a really fantastic night. And to everyone who came and participated and just sort of engaged with us all, we really, really enjoyed having you here and getting your questions and seeing all of your messages and stuff. So thank you so much, and we will hope to see you again next week. Thanks,
Emma.
Thanks, Emma.
Bye.
Bye, guys.